That's no problem. Okay.
Now we're going down to the arrivals. Don't go that way. Just come back inside. Come back inside.
Around.
Can now go.
Hey, don't rush. Get close, please.
So they also would like another ceremony over here.
I'm live. I can't run like I can't run. Thank you.
And then you look at you have 3 lanes now for
Let's see. Okay, the first one
settle down here. Let him free yourself.
You will pass.
Innocent is still open.
Rioting that. No, I said, no. You have, if you don't have it, stay there. They give you the shot. They give you the shot and you In fact, some changes were in South Africa. Apart from they charged me about $7. They gave me the shot. Anytime you are still. Yeah. Sorry, 77. They're charging $70, and I paid $70, and they have my home for 1 hour. All this
Let's go this way. More than enough kiosks for the immigration and
That's good. I have. You can see okay. Okay.
what is that area? Then this is the way from this is the house to the arrival baggage carousel.
And on the baggage carousel, people here will
Let's get that shot.
Of course.
Look what's happening. Don't go back. I'm coming now.
I'm also alive.
No, me not pushing like that.
You don't get there.
Yes, sir. It's not everything I'm recording. It's not everything. I'm taking it like cut away.
We are getting feedback. Arrival baggage carousel.
Upstairs, I'm still going upstairs. Yeah, how about? Let's move.
Okay.
Let's go up. Let's go up.
Let's all go up.
Sorry.
Good exercise.
Now go home and sleep. I've done that.
So we gradually move back. Small. Yes, sir. Moving. Okay. It was a tough thing. Good.
Do you not know that our enemies have no face? They are indigents of no state. They come from no place. And if this boat capsizes, every one of us will go under. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do not say, I am the Iroko when the forest is burning. Do not say, I am the Obeche when the forest is burning. Our differences will not stop us from perishing together. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do you not know that our enemies have no face? They are indigents of no state. They come from no place. And if this boat capsizes, every one of us will go under. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do not say, I am the Iroko when the forest is burning. Do not say, I am the Obeche when the forest is burning. Our differences will not stop us from perishing together. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer.
Nigerians watching us from their homes and their offices, members of the airport and fan family hosting us this evening, gentlemen of the press, a very good evening to you, and let me welcome you to the national briefing for Thursday, 3rd September 2020. Holding at the departure hall of the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport. We've just concluded the first part of today's proceeding, that is the inspection of the tour, inspection of the facility. Now we're in the second part. We'll take the remarks of the chairman of the Presidential Task Force. We'll take further elaboration from the national coordinator and honorable ministers, if we have any, before we take your questions. But today is also a significant day, and we want to remind our colleagues from the media that after the chairman's remarks, we will tailor our questions strictly within the content of the remarks of the chairman, because we're beginning another phase. At this point, let me invite the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 to the podium to deliver his remarks.
Honorable Ministers and distinguished members of the Presidential Task Force, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen of the press, let me first thank you all, particularly our colleagues in the media, for taking our time to join us at this inspection tour and also participating in the national briefing for today, the 3rd of September 2020. We are holding this briefing at the international wing of the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport ahead of the reopening of the airspace for international flights. Following the approval of recommendations contained in the 6th interim report by Mr. President, the Presidential Task Force on Thursday, 6th August, announced a further extension of Phase 2 of the eased lockdown, albeit with modifications on the restrictions. 1 month down the line, we consistently briefed the nation about the changing situation around the world and the challenges nations and scientists have been facing. In cumulative terms, the virus continues to pose enormous threat to humanity and all known systems. The global response has continued to witness huge deployment of resources and collaborative efforts to combat the pandemic. Notwithstanding all this, the following statistics depict the virulent nature of the virus. The global confirmed cases have exceeded 25 million, standing as of yesterday, 25,917,000. Since hitting the 50 million mark, numbers have been increasing by 1 million cases every 3 to 4 days. The countries today that top the global disease burden include the United States of America with 6,257,938. Brazil with 3.952 million. India with 3.769 million. And Russia with over 1 million. South Africa still has the highest case count in Africa, but has fallen from the 5th to the 6th position in the world. In Ethiopia, the numbers have been on the increase. Both South Africa and Ethiopia are of interest to Nigeria in view of the passenger traffic between Nigeria and the two countries, and our plans to reopen the international airspace calls that to question. Global challenges impacting the fight against the pandemic have been identified to include the following. 1, general complacency setting in among the populace of virtually all the countries. People are tired and exhausted of COVID-19. 2, non-adherence to the non-pharmaceutical initiatives that have been introduced worldwide. 3, politicization of the pandemic. In some countries, it's being highly politicized. As a matter of fact, it would define the outcome of their elections. And 4thly, limited funding across many countries for the response needs. Because of dwindling income, several nations are battling with inability to fund the response adequately. By way of comparisons, the changes in numbers between August and September are depicted in the table below. But let me just give you an idea. Change in cases between August and September 2020. On the 1st of August, globally, the record was 18,216,000 plus. But on the 1st of September, you can see how the figure had jumped to 25,892,051 cases. So there was an absolute increase of 7.6 million plus cases. In terms of percentages, 42% increase within a period of 1 month. The same thing in Africa. From 961,000 plus on the 1st of August to 1.2 million on the 1st of September, with a clear increase of over 300,000, representing 32%. The story is no different back home in Nigeria, where on the 1st of August we had 43,000 plus, and on the 1st of September it went up to 54,000 plus, with a clear increase of over 10,000 cases, representing 25% of the increase. And so are the figures when you come to the issues of changing deaths. Globally, 1st of August, 692,000 plus deaths. And in September, it rose to 860,000 plus deaths. A clear increase in absolute figures of 168,000 plus. In terms of percentages, 24%. Same thing in Africa, and similarly the same thing on the soils of our country. The global community has made appreciable progress in the development of COVID-19 vaccine. As of 28th August 2020, like I have said in my previous briefings, a total of 173 candidate vaccines were under evaluation. 33 candidate vaccines are under clinical evaluation. 8 are in the phase 3 trials, while 143 candidate vaccines are in the preclinical evaluation. The Presidential Task Force would continue to monitor developments so that the country can benefit from the emergence of an effective vaccine. There is a politics to this. We would coordinate and work with the World Health Organization and other multilateral agencies to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of vaccines when they show up. The Presidential Task Force has continued to assess developments in Nigeria preparatory to the determination of the next steps. As of September 2nd, 2020, the number of confirmed cases in Nigeria, as I said, is 54,463, with 1,027 recorded deaths, unfortunately. Between August and September, the number of states with over 1,000 confirmed cases increased from 10 to 12 at the FCT. The case fatality ratio has consistently remained at 1.9%, indicating that there has been improvement in case management and, as a result, fewer COVID-19 deaths. Similarly, the cumulative test positivity ratio, TPR, which shows how many percent of our total tests are positive, has reduced from 15.2% at the end of July to 13.3% at the end of August. There are tables when you get my statement that illustrate the situation of the CFR and the TPR. The accomplishments recorded through the national response in the period under review include the following. 1. Nigeria now has 68 laboratories in the COVID-19 network, spread across 34 states and the Federal Capital Territory. The remaining 2 states, Kebbi and Niger, are in the pipeline for coverage in the next few weeks. The PTF has strengthened collaboration with all the states in the country to maintain one national response to address the pandemic. This has been driven by joint work between the PTF and the subcommittee of the National Economic Council chaired by the Governor of Delta State, Dr. Ifeanyi Okowa. 3, the number of cumulative samples tested has exceeded 400,000 plus. 4, increased risk communication through collaboration with community leaders and partners. And 5, we've improved synergy and collaboration with the legislature. 6, successful conclusion of the evaluation process of evacuation of stranded Nigerians ahead of the resumption of international flights. 7, we've built stronger coordination with the private sector to mobilize resources for the response. And 8, we've launched 2 dashboards to improve transparency about the response and the deployment of resources. 9, we've generated increased partner support for the response at the state level. 10, Nigeria's efforts in case management and contact tracing have continued to keep our death rate well below the global average. And 11, new guidelines have been developed to support the safe reopening of other sectors of the economy. The National Coordinator will brief further on these guidelines. Notwithstanding the foregoing, our national response, like in other countries of the world, continue to face significant obstacles. And these obstacles include, but not limited to: 1, insufficient engagement by some states with the national response. And it's not peculiar to Nigeria alone. All over the world, especially in federating units, approaches differ, and sometimes they conflict. 2, low number of sample collection sites and rate of sample collection. It's a major obstacle. And lastly, 3, declining level of compliance with non-pharmaceutical preventive measures that we have put in place. The Presidential Task Force is particularly disturbed by the low level of sample collection because of what it portends for the strategy of testing, detection, tracing, isolation, and treatment. Let me give you an example. In the month of July, 7 states reported lower numbers of samples collected than in the preceding month. But in the month of August, this number rose from 7 to 32 states that reported lower collected samples than the preceding months. This illustrates that despite the increased diagnostic capacity and improved access to testing, the demand remains low, with not enough samples being collected. Therefore, the recent reduction in cases in some states could be attributable or attributed to the low testing that is taking place in those states. I want to enjoin an appeal to the subnationals at this point to ramp up their testing, because we right now have an installed capacity of testing of 15,000 samples on a daily basis. There is no reason why our testing figures should continue to decline. Nigerians will all recall that at the onset of the ease lockdown, the Presidential Task Force drafted a 3-phase strategy of easing the restrictions ahead of a full reopening of the society and economy. In determining what phase of the strategy to move to, the Presidential Task Force tried to balance the public health considerations and also economic considerations alongside data analysis. The PTF believes that while Nigeria is not ready for full reopening of the economy, there has been sufficient progress to warrant significant further relaxation of the restrictions applied. Based on the foregoing, the Presidential Task Force today submitted its 7th interim report to Mr. President for his consideration and approval. The main thrust of the recommendation is that Nigeria advances to the 3rd phase of ease restrictions with further amendments to address economic, socio-political, and health concerns. This will last till a time when the pandemic is sufficiently controlled in our country. Accordingly, Mr. President has considered and approved the following. 1. Transition to the 3rd phase of the national response to COVID-19 for a period of 4 weeks with effect from tonight, 12:01 a.m. on Friday, 4th of September 2020, in line with amendments to address economic, socio-political, and health considerations reflected in the implementation guidelines. 2. Continued engagement with states and local governments to improve community sensitization on the response and its attendant effects. 3. Maintaining the current non-pharmaceutical interventions nationwide, that is the wearing of masks, maintaining of social distancing, personal hygiene by way of washing of hands, of use of sanitizers, and avoiding crowded environments, and as much as possible, staying at home. 4. Urging the state governments to work with local government authorities in their state to intensify necessary measures such as contact tracing, grassroots engagement, and risk communication. 5. Strengthening the collaboration between the federal and state organs to harmonize the country's COVID-19 response in the short, medium, and long-term basis. And 6. Introduction of sanctions, including the suspension of passports or denials of foreign travels for violation of current provisional travel-related quarantine protocols. Mr. President has similarly considered the fact that the 6-month mandate of the Presidential Task Force would expire this month, particularly on the 17th of September, and has therefore extended the lifespan of the Presidential Task Force until the end of December 2020. The objective is to sustain a robust multi-sectoral national response, to ensure that we successfully navigate the community spread stage of the pandemic, and 3, strengthen our health system and other economic and social infrastructure to enable them meet our national aspirations. And 4thly, we are opening up our international skies. We are also making haste to allow our children go back to schools, particularly at the tertiary level and secondary level. There is need for the Presidential Task Force to continue to navigate these processes, lest we return to the early days of the pandemic. The National Coordinator will now provide the details of the changes to the guidelines and the protocols. Once more, I thank you for your kind attention and wish you a very, very pleasant evening here at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, and to also thank the management of the Federal Airports Authority, and by extension, the Minister and his team for the great job that they have done in first getting Enugu Airport runway commissioned and put back into service, and also the demonstration of how they have taken very proactive steps to ensure that our people travel well, travel safe, and as much as possible, giving them the confidence that every measure that will secure their health and their well-being is accorded when they pass through our airports, particularly the two international airports with which we will commence international operations by Saturday, the 5th of September. Thank you, and God bless.
The chairman of the Presidential Task Force, honorable ministers, members of the PTF, gentlemen of the press, good evening. So I'll be taking you through some of the changes that will come as a result of our transition onto phase 3 of a relaxation of the lockdown process. I will first of all start with general movement. We are modifying the curfew to commence from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. nationwide, effective from 12:01 hours tonight. This does not apply to people on essential services and international travelers that might be returning from abroad. In terms of other aspects of general movement, no formal restriction will be applied within the country, but the risk remains. And therefore, citizens, in particular vulnerable groups, the elderly, those with underlying medical illnesses, are strongly advised to continue keeping away from mass gatherings and the general public and staying at home. We will be engaging closely with state governments with regards to the issue of compliance, particularly with face masks, because we remain quite concerned about the low level of compliance with this simple intervention measure that we know is quite effective. The Honorable Minister of Aviation will be talking about the process for opening the international airport. We're very pleased that this process has gone quite smoothly, and we aim to open up our skies on the 5th of September. The Nigerian International Travel Portal will become live tonight, and I would like to specifically thank the private sector, CACOVID, for making this possible. Without them, it would have taken us a much longer period to get through the hurdles. I would also like to thank other government agencies, in particular NITDA, Infrastructure Commission, Concession Regulatory Commission, the NCDC, the FCT departments, and other parts of government for coming together to make sure this process is smooth. The key changes when it comes to aviation is the mandatory need for persons coming into the country to have a valid negative COVID PCR result before boarding, and this needs to be valid within 96 hours, preferably within 72 hours of boarding. For land and rail transport, there are no limitations anymore on inter- and intrastate travel, but service providers must abide by stated stipulations from the Federal Ministry of Transport and ensure that PPEs are used, and where applicable, physical distancing is observed. In terms of working arrangements, for the private sector, we will allow the private sector to determine the optimal working capacity within their offices while ensuring enough physical distancing and preserving the health care of workers in their employ. For the public sector, we are maintaining the restriction and encouraging the work-at-home policy for staff below the level of grade level 12. Those at grade level 12 and above will be allowed to come to work. In terms of communal commercial spaces, including markets, we are removing all restrictions on opening days and limits in stores, but store owners must take responsibility by abiding with non-pharmaceutical interventions and policies to safeguard their staff and patrons of their facilities. And we will be working with the FCT and other state governments to make sure that their task forces for compliance continue to be effective during this period. For the hospitality and entertainment industry, hotels will continue to remain open but observing all non-pharmaceutical interventions. Amusement parks, gyms and cinemas can open but at half capacity. Event centers that provide outdoor spaces can open but not indoor event centers. Eateries and restaurants can only open for outdoor services, and we will make sure this is complied with. Bars and nightclubs to remain closed till further notice. Each authority within the states can provide additional guidelines for minimizing risk in their state as it relates to these facilities and industries. For the National Youth Service Corps, the NYSC is to consolidate on safety measures currently being put in place and start preparing for reopening of orientation camps when educational institutions open. And we are in the process of developing strict guidelines to ensure there's no outbreak of COVID-19 when this process starts. For INEC, the PTF continues to work closely with INEC. We are pleased that the last elections that were conducted in Nasarawa State, I believe, were successful. We will continue to partner closely with INEC to ensure that the election process does not pose a risk to the spread of COVID. INEC would ensure compliance with the publicized policy on conducting safe elections in the context of COVID-19, in particular the mandatory use of face mask, no voting, provision of hand sanitizers at polling units, temperature checks at polling units, and observation of physical distancing in all electoral activities. For educational institutions, which includes daycare, primary, secondary, and tertiary care, educational institutions should begin the process of working towards potentially reopening within this phase. However, we strongly recommend that states conduct risk assessment to ensure all schools are at a level of compliance and create a monitoring mechanism to assess and monitor this level of compliance. Meanwhile, all daycare and educational institutions to remain closed to in-person classes until this level of risk is assessed. And if there will be opening of schools, it must be staged and preferably carried out in phases to ensure that this does not pose a risk to the general public, and in particular to vulnerable groups that might end up getting infected by students going back home. For religious centers, we continue to restrict opening subject to the protocols agreed by respective state governments and FCT. And centers are strongly advised to prioritize multiple services to prevent overcrowding and facilitate physical distancing. For recreational facilities and sports, nothing has changed. We have already removed restrictions on outdoor communal non-contact sports and the use of recreational parks for supervised physical exercise. For gatherings, including weddings, parties, meetings, etc., we are expanding the limit to 50 people, preferably outdoors, not in enclosed spaces, and attendees must wear face masks, and they must ensure proper sanitization of their hands and maintaining physical distancing. We will make available this updated protocol for release to the general public. We hope that as we continue to progressively open up our economy, the general public will continue to cooperate and comply with us when it comes to the implementation of non-pharmaceutical interventions. We cannot afford to go back to where we were before. We have made substantial progress as a country in terms of our COVID response, but we are still in a very risky period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, National Coordinator. I will now invite the Minister of Aviation to the podium to give us an update.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the task force, my good friends, gentlemen of the media, the date we have been waiting is here. The airports will be opened, the two airports, Abuja and Lagos, will be opened for operations on the 5th of this month, as said, and we are satisfied with the preparations so far. We don't anticipate any hitches. Before we go into the procedure and what has changed, I will quickly go through the airlines and the timetable. Beginning on Saturday, for Lagos, there will be BA, Delta, Emirates, Qatar, AWA, Kenyan Airways, and Middle East Airlines. For Abuja, there will be BA, Egypt Air, Emirates, Ethiopian Airlines, AWA, Middle East Airlines, and Turkish. And then we will release to you the timetable for the remaining days as we go, because it's lengthy, to save time. In our decisions, we use two items. The foreign carrier operating permit, which is a requirement by our laws for every airline, foreign airline that is operating into Nigeria, and of course the guidelines by COVID-19 task force, and then by other guidelines as restrictions that comes from other countries, which will affect our own operations here at home. So I'm glad to announce that the PTF had considered graciously and approved the following. And we take the time to go through the details of what is expected of any passenger arriving or departing passenger out of Nigeria. So all intending travelers to Nigeria must have tested negative for COVID-19 by PCR in country of departure before boarding. This has not changed. The test of the PCR must be within 4 days before departure, and we prefer 72 hours pre-boarding. And note that certain countries, the PCR test will only be accepted from identified laboratories. Tests done more than 4 days before departure are not valid. This is very important. Tests that are done more than 4 days before departure are not valid, and persons will not be allowed to board But for the 72 hours minimum, this is advisory and will not preclude you from boarding. This is very clear. All intending passengers are required to register via a national payment portal online, Nigeria International Travel Portal, and the website is http://nitp.ncdc.gov.ng. So it's nitp.ncdc.gov.ng, and the pay for a repeat second PCR test to be done upon arrival in Nigeria. Once payment is completed, passengers will receive an email from the selected laboratories of their choice, providing them with the laboratory link to register for the repeat COVID-19 PCR test on 7th day after arrival. When you arrive, the 7th day after your arrival. Passengers will be allowed to choose a sample collection center and an appointment time and date for sample collection. A list of the accredited private laboratories provided and sample collection centers across the country will be available on the payment platform and the NCDC website. So it's very clear and simple. Passengers will also fill in the online health declaration self-reporting form co-located on the same national payment platform and submit online or print out for presentation on arrival. They should ensure that the information, contact details provided on the form are correct, are verifiable, and that they can be reached on that number and address provided. Passengers must inform port health officials on arrival of any change in their health circumstance since completion of the health declaration self-reporting form. In other words, take responsibility. Prior to boarding, passengers are requested to upload their COVID-19 PCR negative results on the national payment portal and bring along an electronic or hard copy of the result for presentation at the airport. At the time of boarding, all travelers will undergo thermal screening for fever and questioned for symptoms of COVID-19. Passengers with COVID-19 related signs and symptoms will not be allowed to board the flight. And airlines must only board passengers with negative COVID-19 test results that were done within the stipulated 4 days before boarding. Airlines that board passengers without a negative COVID-19 PCR test or test results more than 4 days prior to boarding will be sanctioned as follows. Non-Nigerians may be refused entry and returned to the point of embarkation at the cost of the airline. So the airline will pay the cost of taking those people back to where they come from once they are boarded without a negative PCR test result or more than 4 days prior to boarding. B, Nigerians will be allowed entry but subjected to a mandatory quarantine of 8 to 14 days depending on the results of COVID PCR test done 7 days of arrival. So once you come, we will force you into quarantine at a facility approved by government under the cost of the passenger, and you must bear that cost. If you trick it and beat the system and you come here, we put you into forced quarantine and you pay for that cost. Airlines will be fined $3,500 per passenger for failure to comply with the pre-boarding requirements. This is in our laws. How I wish it is higher. This is as you are arriving. Then on arrival in Nigeria, all passengers arriving in Nigeria will be required, 1, to go through the routine port health screening and present electronic or print out evidence for pre-boarding PCR test results and evidence of payment for a repeat PCR test in the country, Nigeria. To present their international passports for clearance through immigration service, called the MIDAS, and passengers biodata page and picture will be forwarded to all the COVID PCR sample collection centers to enable proper identification before sample collection. Passports will not be returned by Immigration Service as it used to be. So this will cease. Then, number 3, to proceed on a 7-day self-isolation quarantine, during which time they are to avoid physical interaction with friends, with family, with colleagues, and other members of the public, i.e. they must observe strict physical and social distancing. Passengers are please reminded to check their emails regularly for updates regarding the arrangement for their repeat COVID-19 PCR test from the laboratory of their choice. Number 4, passengers to present themselves at the sample collection centers on the 7th day of arrival. Samples will be taken and COVID-19 PCR test done. A reminder text message may be sent to the passenger by the private laboratory provider a day before the appointment. This is not mandatory on the laboratory. You should take responsibility and key into your phone an alert that will remind you, but they will be gracious and kind enough to remind you. Kindly note the following. Passengers who fail to submit themselves at the sample collection centers on day 7 of arrival will be sent text reminders and their details forwarded to State Public Health Department teams and NCDC for active follow-up. Private laboratories will be required to forward details of passengers who decline repeat PCR tests by day 14 of arrival for sanctioning. These passengers may be sanctioned with suspension of their passports or inclusion on travel watch list for 6 months and denied foreign travel for this period. Test results will be ready within 24 to 48 hours, and the State Public Health Department teams and National Center for Disease Control will be informed accordingly. Persons who test positive for COVID-19 will be managed based on national guidelines for COVID-19 treatment. Passengers who test negative for COVID-19 after 7 days will end isolation on the 8th day, and that is good for them to proceed with their normal activity. Then travelers reporting or developing symptoms of COVID-19 on arrival into the country or during screening will not be allowed to self-quarantine. They will be placed on institutional quarantine, i.e. once you present here with COVID symptoms or during our checkup here in the airport, we'll take you to an institutional quarantine provided for that purpose. For deportees, if one person tests positive for COVID-19, all close primary contacts will be required to undergo enhanced screening and follow-up PCR tests as necessary. And passengers will be monitored by public health officers during the period of self-isolation or quarantine. For this reason, passengers will be required to provide a functioning telephone number on their online registration forms. Persons who develop symptoms of COVID-19 during the isolation period will immediately be tested for COVID-19. If positive, they will be managed based on national guidelines for COVID-19 treatment. Exit from self-isolation. Persons who have tested negative for COVID-19 after 7 days of self-isolation quarantine will be allowed to exit from self-isolation on day 8. Now, at this point, it is important that we announce the airlines that are allowed for operations into the country. Well, the one not approved, number 1, Air France is not approved. Middle East Airlines is approved for both Lagos. They only come to Lagos anyway, approval here from Lebanon. British Airways, approved, allowed entry under COVID-19 protocols. Now, the reason for Air France is that tourist visas holders are not allowed entry. KLM not approved for the same reason as Air France. Delta Airlines, no restrictions. USA will have an open skies with them, and also they allow us in also. Qatar Airways are allowed and approved under COVID-19 protocols. Etihad not approved. Ethiopian Airlines allowed entry under COVID-19 protocols. Egypt Air approved, allowed entry under COVID-19 protocols. Rwanda Air not approved. Air Peace not applicable, they are approved, they are our own carrier in Nigeria, we thank them. Virgin Atlantic approved, allowed entry under COVID-19 protocols. Air Namibia not approved. Air Sky approved. Royal Air Morocco not approved. Africa World Airways, AWA Ghana approved. Air Cote d'Ivoire approved. Lufthansa not approved. Kenya Airways approved, KQ. Emirates Airlines approved. Turkish Airlines approved. Cabo Verde not applicable as international flights are not resumed rather. Angola TAG not approved. South Africa not applicable because international flights have not resumed. Now, quickly and last from us in aviation, I will go through the timetable. Saturday for Lagos, BA, Delta, Emirates, Qatar, AWA, Kenya Airways, and Middle East. For Abuja, BA, Egypt Air, Emirates, Ethiopian, AWA, Middle East, and Turkish. On Sunday for Lagos, Delta, Air Senegal, Virgin Atlantic, Ethiopian, AWA, Kenya Airways, and Turkish. For Abuja, on Sunday, BA, Egypt Air, Emirates, Ethiopian, and AWA. On Monday, Turkish, for Lagos, Turkish, Air Senegal, Virgin Atlantic, Qatar, AWA, Kenya Airways, and BA. For Abuja, on Monday, BA, Emirates, Ethiopian, and AWA. On Tuesday, for Lagos, BA, Emirates, Egypt Air, Virgin, Ethiopian, and AWA. For Abuja, BA, Emirates, Ethiopian, AWA, and Turkish. And for Wednesday, Lagos, Delta, Turkish, Air Senegal, Ethiopian, AWA, Kenya Airways, and Middle East. Then BA for Abuja, BA, Emirates, Ethiopian, and AWA. On Thursday, for Lagos, BA, Delta, Egypt Air, Emirates, Ethiopian, Qatar, AWA. And for Abuja, BA, Egypt Air, Emirates, AWA, Ethiopian, and Turkish. And finally, on Friday, Air Senegal for Lagos, Egypt Air, Virgin Atlantic, Turkish, AWA, Kenyan, and Middle East. And for Abuja, BA, Emirates, Ethiopian, AWA, and Middle East. Then we anticipate that this timetable will be repeated. If there's any change, we'll be advised by the task force and we will inform you accordingly. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of Aviation. We will now move over to the question session. Before we do that, let me remind us that we will stay strictly within the confines of the remarks of the chairman of the PTF. So if you are ready with your questions, we'll take them. Okay.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. There's just a quick announcement. There will be a Zoom meeting tonight at 8 p.m. By NCAA. I know some of you, the gentlemen of media, do hook onto that Zoom meeting. You are invited, where all of these things that we loaded will also be there. 8:30? Musa? 8:30? 8:30 tonight on the Zoom meeting. This will be further discussed and they will be displayed because the information is massive according to Mr. Chairman, so that you can also download it. We'll give you the soft and hard copies as well. Thank you.
So please frame your questions to interrogate what the chairman has presented, and you can extend it to the national coordinator and the Minister of Aviation.
The Chairman, National Coordinator, members of the PTF, my colleagues. My name is Amaka Ode. I report for Arise News. And I have one quick question. More like I need an update in terms of what we're doing to get the ban on Nigeria and Nigerians flying to the EU as well as other countries that have banned us. An update as to how we're working to get that reversed. Thank you.
Good evening all. Rachel Abuja from the News Agency of Nigeria. My first question is for the SGF. So what are the aims and priorities for PTF during this extension to avoid getting extended to the next year? And my second question is for the coordinator. What criteria is the PTF using to evaluate success in the opening of the international airspace? And is there an arrival positivity rate threshold that will determine if we consider closing international borders again? Sir, my third question is for the Aviation Minister. Sir, you spoke about 72 hours test and 7 days. For Nigerians coming in from Australia and New Zealand, I don't know how that case will be. Now, this leads to my next question for you, sir. How do we check a genuine certificate for COVID-19 result for incoming travelers and people going out, Nigerians going out? Now, will there be or is there any security component attached for identification? And for payment of test, is it just the private sectors that are benefiting? How can Nigeria, let's say, get revenue from testing also? Thank you very much.
Good evening, members of the PTF. My question goes to the Minister of Aviation. Earlier, the SGF made mention of Nigeria being concerned about the rising cases in South Africa and Ethiopia, and now Ethiopian Airline is being allowed to fly in. What's the rationale of allowing them to come in? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Hassan Umar Farouk. I report for Liberty Radio and Television. My own is follow of the question of the rule of reciprocity. But in Hausa, Minister of Aviation, muna son kai mana ƙarin bayani kan ƙasashen da Najeriya ta ce za ta yi musu abin da suka yi mata. Kuma za mu so mu ji ƙasar Ingila ba ta cikin waɗannan ƙasashe. Sannan wani tabbaci za ka ba in Najeriya cewa yadda aka shigo da corona ta zirga-zirgar jiragen sama na ƙasa da ƙasa yanzu da aka sake buɗewa ba za a sake shigo da wannan cututtuka ba. Sakataren gwamnatin tarayya a cikin bayanin da aka yi kan maganar wannan zango na uku na sassauta dokar hana shiga da fita. Menene maganar buɗe makarantu ne? Thank you very much.
Good evening, members of the PTF. My name is Yemi Adebayo from AIT. My first question is to the SGF, sir. Clearly, it took Nigeria more than 2 months to advance to this third phase of the gradual easing of lockdown. I want to find out from you, sir. You agree with me that states now have more responsibilities as it stands in this current phase. What is the collaboration like? Are you planning of perhaps through the NGF meeting with some of the state governors on the need for them to understand that now that the third phase has been opened up and the economy has been fully opened, they have more responsibility to ensure that we don't have a surge in the pandemic. My next question is to the Honorable Minister of Aviation. I want to find out from you, sir, some of the airlines that you talked about that they can't have access to the country. Is it as a result of the fact that they have not been able to meet up to the COVID-19 guidelines set out by the Nigerian government? Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the PTF. I am Itaire Ikpen. I report for the NTA. I want the PTF to be categorical on this. Is the PTF giving state governments the go-ahead to reopen schools? Thank you.
Thank you. We've taken all the questions and we will receive our responses in the following order. The National Coordinator will start, followed by the Honorable Minister of Aviation before the Chairman of the PTF wraps it up. So I invite the National Coordinator to the podium.
Thank you. So I think the first question had to do with what's the criteria to evaluate success when it comes to the process of opening up the international airspace. Well, first of all, what we are trying to do is to mitigate risk. We're trying to minimize the number of importations that come into the country. We know that there are cases outside the country, but we also know that within the country we also have community transmission. What we intend to do is to make sure that anybody coming into the country is not infectious as at the time they come into the country, based on the COVID-19 PCR test we'll do. And if those individuals isolate themselves, because isolation is the most effective way of stopping transmission. It's not testing. Testing will only give you information. If you get a negative test, it's only of value as at the time you did the test. It can change from any time thereon. So isolation is the key intervention that would stop transmission. We will be monitoring the number of cases as we test on day 7. We'll be monitoring the number of positives we're getting. We will also be comparing people with negative PCR results on entry and those that subsequently PCR seroconvert to find out whether there's a specific pattern that has to do with countries. We have already worked closely with some of the countries that have had a relatively high level of importation of cases into the country over the last 4 or 5 months. We've met with their ambassadors. We've requested for a list of accredited laboratories. They have also taken back our concerns to their home governments and are working with us and our own embassies in their countries to make sure that we minimize any risk of transmission. We have to open the international airspace because this is really critical for our economy. We know other countries across Africa, including our neighbors, are in the process of opening up their airports as well and their airspaces. If we do not open and continue to remain closed, inevitably what we will have is a situation where people smuggle themselves out of the country in order to travel to go and do their business. So we need to have control of this process. And the only way we can have control is to make sure that control is within our reach. and within our airports. We are opening only Abuja and Lagos for now. The number of flights, the number of passengers is still limited. It's about a third of what we usually get. So we should be able to manage this situation to start on, and then we will subsequently ramp up. So in terms of your question, is there a specific target that we are trying to reach in terms of positivity? No, there cannot be. All I can say is we will do whatever we can to minimize the risk of importation of COVID into our country. And we will monitor it to make sure that if there's a need for us to change our policy, we will have the ability to do so. In addition to that, we know that technology is changing. At some point, we hope to have rapid diagnostic tests that are reliable and that can be done at the point of entry, so that those that are positive at the point of entry can immediately be isolated. But for the moment, this is the protocol we will follow to enable quick and early opening of the airports in a safe manner. The other question, I think, has to do with how do we establish the genuineness of COVID PCR tests? Well, as I said earlier, we are working with the national governments. We know the countries that we've had issues with, and now that we have a list of accredited labs from some of those countries, and we also have assurance from the governments of these countries that they will look into their processes, we hope that the issue of discrepant PCR results will no longer arise. But having said that, you can have a test today for COVID and you're negative, and tomorrow you could convert to positive because you could be in the incubation period. In fact, if you were to have a test before arrival and you come in and have a repeat test, if you already have the disease and you're incubating it, you will pick it up in 7% of cases. But the more you delay the testing, the higher the likelihood that you will pick up those that are going to convert from PCR negative to PCR positive. But we'll continue to work very closely with all parts of government, including the immigration, the security, the port health people, and also our partners from outside the country, other countries, to make sure that there is no spread of COVID across the world. Because it's not just us stopping the importation of COVID, it's also our responsibility to make sure that we don't export COVID to other countries that do not have a problem of COVID-19. The question about, is it just the private labs that will do the test? Yes, certainly for Abuja. I know Lagos already have a portal, and I think they have part of the public laboratory system that is doing the test. But we are deliberately not allowing the public laboratories to be engaged in travel-related testing because it will distract them from their primary duty of ensuring that the general public, the community, have access to free COVID PCR tests. That is why we are engaging only the private laboratories for the moment. We know the private laboratories have capacity. Lagos, for instance, the combined capacity of the private and the public labs is more than 5,000 tests a day. Here in Abuja, we're in the process of getting more and more private laboratories to come up onto the platform. And the requirements for coming onto the platform are very simple. There are just three. One, you need to have registration with the Laboratory Council of Nigeria. Two, you need to have been assessed by NCDC and judged to be fit to be doing PCR tests based on your quality assurance, your safety measures, etc. in the lab. And thirdly, you must be registered with the state authorities where you're working, where you're providing the service, so that your results can feed into the state numbers. If you have that, you can go onto the platform, and we'll make sure you do. Over the next few weeks, we will start the process of getting the same registration for Kano, for Port Harcourt, and for Enugu, so that we have a network of laboratories based on a hub and spoke, private laboratories that can provide this testing to travelers that have come into the country as well as travelers that are going out of the country. But the answer to your question, how can Nigerians benefit from this? well, private businesses pay tax, and there's also a small percentage that is levied by the state authorities for reasons of logistics and for reasons of adding the numbers onto the computer systems, etc. So yes, there will be some cost element for the labs that will go back to the state authorities. None will come to the PTF, just to be very clear. Schools. We did not say schools shall open. What we said specifically that schools remain closed as far as the PTF is concerned, but what we intend to do is to work with state governments as well as the federal to make sure that a proper risk assessment is made of every school that will open. That's the most important element. If you say every school open, different schools will have different levels of compliance. So the first stage is for state authorities to look at the level of preparedness of their schools, make a risk assessment, find out, do they have running water? Do they have access to face masks? Can they strengthen physical distancing? Can they avoid the children mixing with each other and exchanging viruses, etc.? And then open up. But we hope that this will be done within the current phase of the response. We are also advising that schools open in a staged manner. So universities, secondary schools, primary schools, rather than opening all at once. And we need to make sure that state authorities have made provision for things like face masks, etc., for young people that may not be able to afford it. There's no doubt opening schools comes with its risks, but at the same time, the education of our young ones is really important. And there's a limit to how long we can continue to keep our children out of school, especially those that do not have access to internet, etc. But they've got to be opened safely. That's the baseline, that's the condition we are applying. Unless schools are open safely, we will have a problem, definitely. I think I've answered all the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I may quickly also add that if there is any benefit for these private labs to Nigerians, one, of course, they will offer employment, and two, also they will develop skills in addition to the taxes that they pay. So every single business that comes, there's skill developed, there's employment given, and there's tax paid. In taking decisions as to who comes, in the wisdom of both the PTF and the Ministry for Civil Aviation, we understood that Nigeria had done very well. Mr. President has done very well. Mr. Chairman and the ministers and national coordinators, they have done very well, extremely very well. We are 200 million people for emphasis. We are yet talking about just about 1,000 number of deaths. 50,000 infected, 40,000 released, discharged. If you look at Europe, Italy, for example, what is the population of Italy? 60 million or thereabout? At a time, 1,000 people were dying daily. This is the total number that we got so far in Nigeria. In Spain, 1,000 people were dying, 47 million people. But we are 200 million people, and we're still talking about 1,000. I think we've done very well to fight this disease. So they wouldn't have any reason whatsoever to disallow Nigerians to travel. If they have a reason, perhaps commercial, whatever it is. But what we have done is to review what are the issues, what have they done to us. In the case of Britain, IBA, well, they didn't say don't come. They said when you come, we quarantine you. We also say, okay, when you come, we also quarantine you. Simple as that. No issues. Ethiopian, most of the passengers coming are not going to Addis. They are passengers on transit from other countries, and largely are Nigerians. So we say they can come in. We subject you to the protocols of COVID-19. And if Ethiopian will make a mistake and carry you with a positive result, they come here, they take you back to where you come from. If you are Nigerian, you go inside. We quarantine you by force. If you are not Nigerian, they take you back at their cost, and we charge them $3,500. So they are bringing only people that are negative, starting point. So then in Hausa, Ramo Gaya, tsakaninmu da mutanen Birtaniya sun ce kulle mun ce cas. To amma ba kamar yadda aka fahimce su magana ba. Kuma in an ce kulle ka ce cas, kar ka ce cas ka garin jin ciwon kwarawa kwal-kwal. An gane ko? Sai kasance an ce kulle ka ce cas, in an yi kwal ka yi kwal. To amma ba shine magana ba, ba diplomasiya bane wannan. Wannan mu'amala ce da ta shahi cinikayya, da ta shahi wato ƙasa da ƙasa ta fannin sufuri. Abin da ya shahe su a fannace a sufurance shi shafe mu a haka. Kuma tunda muna yaƙi ne da annoba, to abin da ya kamata mu yi shine mu tabbatar da annoban nan bata yawaita a ƙasar mu ba. Duk irin abin da ya kamata mu yi na ƙoƙari kamar yadda na bayyana a turance yanzu, cewa Najeriya mu miliyan 200 ne mutane masu yawan tafiya, amma har yanzu mutanen da suka mutu a Najeriya ba muna cewa ba su da yawa bane ba, kamar 1000 ne, amma an yi yayin lokacin da a Spaniya da Italiya da ita kanta Birtaniya din mutane 1000 suke mutuwa kowace rana. Mu kuma tun da muka fara har zuwa yanzu mutum 1000 ya mutu, su ko kullum sai mutum 1000 ya mutu. To kenan in akwai masu iya maganin wannan cutar mu ne 'yan Najeriya ba su ba. Don haka bai kamata ce sun hana mu zuwa can ba saboda wannan dalili, sai dai akwai lauje a cikin nadi ko wani dalili ne daban. To in ku haka din ne mu ba mu ce musu kakku zo ba, a abinda kuka yi mana sai mu muku, don ba mu san abin sa kuka mana wancan ba, mu yi akwai wata hikima bayanta, mu muke amfani ta mu hikima, in ku zo mu ma mu aje ku. Wannan shine magana Rami Gaya ta Birtaniya. Kuma na ce shugaban kasa ya bakin kokarin shi karkashin jagorancin sakataren gwamnatin Najeriya Boss Mustapha tare da ministoci da national coordinator da mu da ku kuma 'yan jarida masu yadawa da su ma al'umma.
There is a lot of fake news and report circulating, especially on social media, on the coronavirus. Do not believe or partake in the spread of these fake reports. If it is not on the official website